A lot of focus on the coronavirus numbers, and well, our next guest is joining us to help us get ahead of what's to come. Scott Bauer, he's the CEO of Prosper Trading Academy, joins me this morning to help us get the week started. Scott, welcome. Let's just begin with the staggering jobs report, the data that we saw, well, over the last 2 weeks, and your thoughts on how markets have, for the most part, digested the information surprisingly well, Scott.
I think we're in that perfect setup right now where bad news is good news in terms of the jobs, at least. What number would have taken the market down, Ben? Would it have been a total combined over the last 2 weeks of 15 million, 20 million? I don't know. Everybody talks about those whisper numbers that were out there, and I can't imagine those whisper numbers being much worse than we actually saw. But don't you think it's only going to get worse from this point forward?
Yeah. I mean, Scott, it seems like it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately, but maybe the market's kind of factoring that in. We always know and talk about how futures are, well, by definition, forward focus. Speaking of futures and forward focus, let's talk a little bit about the other topic that's raising some eyebrows and certainly on the minds of traders. I'm sure it's on yours today as we get started this week. Crude oil, the OPEC expected meeting today, breaking down. Stephanie was just saying there's mention of how it's more a technical situation rather than back to where we were a week or so ago. The president seemed to hint that there was going to be some progress here. I guess it's just a wait-and-see game at this point.
Well, you and I spoke about this last Thursday, Ben, that you can't really believe what's going on until it happens. And then we get this bombshell over the weekend that it's being delayed. And like you had just mentioned in the prior segment here, it's delayed because of a Zoom conference? Come on. I don't know what's really going on there.
I suggested that, but
I know.
But
no,
it certainly seems odd. And in all fairness, this goes all the way back to March. This isn't just this week or last week. Interestingly enough, and as I suggested with Stephanie, it was interesting to hear the president almost suggests that he'd be willing to enter into some sort of alliance in terms of production. I guess, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but the real, loser here, the real concern here is shale producers, basically, and some of the big names that we look for in terms of stability for our energy demands here in the U.S.
No doubt about it. And there's been really no talk. Well, there's been some talk, but no action whatsoever on what may happen here with the shale producers, with production here in the U.S. And I think that's going to have to be a big part of it for any negotiation that still may happen on Thursday between whether it's Saudi, Russia, and the U.S.
Scott, let's talk a little bit about how, with all the focus being on jobless claims, everybody's saying it's the weekly number. It's going to give us the most closest snapshot and look at what is actually happening in terms of the jobs market. Let's talk about how JOLTS, though, the job openings numbers, I wonder if that's going to be watched closely. Everybody was keeping an eye on that as the job market was exhibiting real good strength in a very robust environment. And then in addition to that, I'm wondering how much focus will the FOMC minutes get? Because these are two numbers that normally, or events that would normally get some attention, but everybody sort of got things sort of in certain buckets as far as how much attention and how much focus they're going to devote to.
Sure. Well, with JOLTS, that number's been great. It's probably going to be abysmal right now. However, the market will give it a pass. The market's going to say, okay, we're going to give it a pass, at least based on what we've seen out of the employment numbers over the last 2 weeks. So I don't think this number tomorrow that we're going to get there is as significant as it has been in the past.
Okay. How about the Fed meeting? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time they met, the minutes that we're going to see, that was basically from pre-corona concerns and certainly before, it started to hit the fan, so to say.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And yeah, things have changed drastically, obviously, since then. So, unless those minutes are updated to what is going on in the here and now, again, that's almost going to be almost irrelevant at this point.
Scott, a couple more questions. I'll let you get on your way. I want to talk a little bit more product specific. How about the strong U.S. dollar? Do you expect this to continue? It continues to hover right around this 100 level. Yep. It's certainly something you and I keep a close eye on. Your thoughts as we start the week out?
Yeah, it has been very strong. And, the biggest pop overnight, maybe over the weekend, is versus the yen as well, as Japan is now declaring, a state of emergency. So you look at that, the dollar's up almost 1%, I think, against the yen right now. It is strong versus most other currencies that we're seeing, against the Aussie dollar, against the Canadian dollar, but really noted against the yen because of what's happening in Japan. So I do think that if anything here, if we bust through this area that we're at right now, Ben, we could even retest that 102.5, 103 area that we saw just a week or two ago.
All right, something to watch there in terms of levels in the dollar and levels in the yen. We're looking at the yen right here and some of the volatility we've seen recently. Scott, I've got one more question for you. I heard Boris Johnson's been hospitalized. I heard it's a precautionary measure. Your thoughts in terms of what this could mean if we start to see some of our lawmakers, our officials that are being forced to kind of take a step back when we need them most. I mean, this ultimately could have a bigger impact and ultimately could slow things down in terms of trying to combat fiscally or monetary stimulus-wise, trying to combat some of the coronavirus concerns that it's going to have on the economy.
There's no doubt about it, and I would hope that they already have some contingencies in place. And God forbid something like that happens to any of our leaders across the board. What it probably does is psychologically put in some panic, some further nervousness into the market here. But hopefully there are some contingency plans.
Yeah, Scott, that's a great point there in terms of the psychological aspect and the nervousness in the market, because ultimately that's really what we're talking about. There's so many unknowns that would add to it, it would seem like. Scott, thanks for breaking it down for us here on a Monday morning and starting the week with us here on the TD Ameritrade Network. Trader Scott Bauer, the CEO of Prosper Trading Academy.